welcome to Simple SQL. Today we're going to talk about importing data into SQL Server. If you don't already have it open, go ahead and open up a copy of Management Studio, get connected to your local instance of SQL Server, and open a new query window. Okay, the first thing we're going to need is a file that we want to import. I've got a sample file here, and I'm showing it to you in Excel. This is a CSV file, or comma separated value file. And this is just some sample sales data like you might see if you export it from an online sales platform. So I've got some items here, their cost, who bought them, etc. I'm going to close out that and show you that the actual underlying data here is a value, a comma, a value, a comma, and that's why it's called a comma separated value file. So between each different element of every row, we've got a comma, and then at the end of each of those rows, we have a carriage return. Okay, so to import this file into SQL Server, go to your Object Explorer, expand your databases, right-click on your database, go to Tasks, and Import Data. You'll be greeted with a welcome screen. Go ahead and click Next on that, and then choose the type of your data source. In this case, we have a CSV file, which is what is called a flat file. So this is just a regular text file. You can see there are a number of different choices available here. A very common one might be to use Excel or maybe Access if you've worked with that at all. So we'll go ahead and click Flat File for now, and then browse for the file that we want to open. You'll see that it defaults to just text files. We'll change that to CSV and pick out our file here. Go ahead and click Open. So we'll see this came with a bunch of default settings, and we're going to come back and look at this more in detail later. But right now I just want to move through the full process and show you what it looks like when you have good clean data and everything is formatted correctly. Let's go ahead and go Next. We'll see that it gives us a preview. We'll hit Next again, and this is going to ask us where we want to put the data. Scroll all the way down to the bottom and pick the SQL Server native client. And then our database is already selected for us because that's where we started. We'll click Next again. And now this is telling us what table it's going to put our data into. In this case, you remember this is the schema. DBO is the default schema of database owner. And then this table name was just picked based on the file name that I'm importing here. We'll go ahead and click on Next. You'll see Run Immediately is checked. That's perfect for us. We'll click Next again. And this is letting us know what it's going to do, and then we'll go ahead and click Finish. And you can see it worked through all of these various things and put 120 rows into the database. We'll go ahead and close this. We're going to right-click our database, select Refresh, expand this out, look in the tables, and we'll see that we now have DBO sample. In our query window, we're going to hit Control-Shift-R to refresh IntelliSense, and now let's select star from sample. Okay, and you can see there's all the data brought in. Okay, so let's look a little bit more about what it did here. Let's expand out our sample table and look at the columns. And you can see that what it did was it selected a varchar 50 for all of these columns. So if you'll remember, that's a variable character column. So even though some of these things have numbers, for example, like our price, these are numbers, they're being treated as characters. And this might be fine for many people's needs, but let's take a look back again at the import process and see what choices we have. We're going to right-click on Simple SQL, go to Tasks, and Import Data, hit Next. Go to our flat file source, get our file again, and let's take a look and see why did it do that. So we can see that the format is delimited, and it's got this thing here that says text qualifier. A text qualifier is something that might have appeared around each value between the commas. For example, if you had text that was going to have commas in it, you might have needed a text qualifier like double quotes or single quotes around each of your values. So that might look something like this. We'll just grab a new file here just so we can see what we mean. So with a text qualifier, if double quotes was our text qualifier, it might look like value 1, value 2, value 3, value with commas, right? And so if you had a text qualifier in there, then that would make sure that there were no read problems with extra commas in your data. Without the text qualifier, if you were to have value with commas like this, you'd actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different fields here. Okay, so that's what the text qualifier is for. You also have your header row delimiter. This is CRLF, which stands for carriage return line feed. So that's just what you get when you press the enter key. And then header rows to skip, it defaults to 0. And so what that means is that it's not skipping over a bunch of stuff at the beginning of the file. So sometimes files that you get out will say this file is blah blah and all this other stuff up here that you don't care about before it gets into the actual meat of the file. So if you had a big header in your file, so in this case I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rows, or 5 different rows there, I would say, okay, well, skip 5 rows before you start trying to read my data. Now, you'll notice there's a bunch of tabs over here that we didn't look at when we just kind of went through. The first one we look at is the columns, right? So in here, you can see we've got delimiter, our separator, and this is just giving me a preview of the different columns. And you'll note up at the top here is use the very first line, my header row, to name my columns, okay? If we go into advanced, we can see that there's a lot more information about each of these columns. And let's look at price specifically, because that's one we're looking at inside SQL Server. We can see that the data type for it is string, okay? And I've used the word string to describe text before. It's something used in a lot of other programming languages. In SQL Server, that's a varchar. And you can see ours was a varchar 50, for example. And so it's got string and then output column width 50. If we didn't want price to be a string, we could change this to something else. And I think we had all integer values in there, so we can look here and we can say, okay, 4-byte signed integer. Great, and so now when we make a new table, we'll see that our price is actually going to come out as an integer data type instead of coming out as a variable character of length 50. Right? And you could do that for all of these columns. So if there were specific columns that you needed, like maybe your quantity column or other things like that, and it didn't detect it, you could go ahead and change the data type for your output column. Okay, click next here, and we're going to go ahead and put this second copy into our database. So again, we go to SQL Server Native Client, we pick our database, we go to next, and you'll see here that we don't have to use this name. We can click in here and we can say sample with number. All right. And then we also have this edit mappings button here. So if we go to edit mappings, we can see that in addition to reading these different columns as a specific data type, we also get to pick how we want that data type to be reflected in the database. Okay, so our price here, for example, this is going to come over as an int, and that's because that's what we set our source to be, right? And all of these, they know that they're coming in as string 50, so it makes them varchar 50. But if we wanted this to be something else, we could drop down right here and pick a data type like date, right? We'll go ahead and click OK. And now we'll go to next, and we're getting a warning here. And the reason we're getting that warning is because our source type is string, our destination type is date. And we're telling it to try to convert it, but hopefully it'll show me the warning here. There we go. Potential loss conversion from string. So what that's telling you is that there's no guarantee that the data that's going to be in a string field is going to be a date. This is assuming that you know what you're doing and that that's definitely date data. Otherwise, it can't promise you anything, right? So, and also I want to point out down here, so on error and on truncation, it says to fail. So what that means is, since we're trying to convert a string to a date, if it runs into anything in that column that it can't convert, it's going to fail the entire package. So what truncation means is being cut off. So if any of our values were too long for the field we were trying to put them in, that would also cause this package to fail. All right, let's go ahead and click next and run immediately. And you'll see this save SSIS package. So SSIS is SQL Server Integration Services. There's a whole lot more we can dive into there. For right now, we're just going to go ahead and skip over this, and we may come back to this later, but for right now, we're just going to stick with the run immediately. Let's go and click Next. It's telling us what it's going to do, and then Finish. Okay. And so remember, we are in sample with number now. Let's close this. Go back to our database. Refresh. And look at our tables again. So there's our table. And when we look at this and we look at the columns, we'll see that our price is an integer, which makes sense for what we had here. And we'll see that our sale date is actually a date field, which also makes sense for what we had here. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit Control-Shift-R again to refresh IntelliSense. And now let's select from sample with number. So you can see it's now formatted the date in the way it prefers to, which is year, month, day, as opposed to some of the other dates in here, where it's still the month/day/year, because these are just text fields. Now that we've gone over how to get data into your database and how you can customize the package to get the correct data types for your data, we're going to go ahead and end this episode here. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at views. Thank you for joining me, and I'll talk to you later.